When you think of those early 2000s Rockets, first guy to come to mind is Steve Francis. But alongside him in the backcourt was another guard who just knew how to put the ball in the basket. Either by penetration or lights out shooting, Cuttino Mobley could fill it up quick. And at just 6'4", he also possessed a refined post game for a player his size. Blossoming into a star at Rhode Island in the late 90s, Mobley led the Rams to their first ever Elite Eight appearance, then was a second-round steal for the Houston Rockets, forming a high-powered backcourt with Steve Francis for half a decade. Then, after a couple quick stops with the Magic and Kings, he looked like a reliable veteran scorer for the LA Clippers, until a questionable heart condition forced him into early retirement. And while you don't hear much about Cuttino Mobley anymore, he was one of the smoothest scorers of his era. And when Ice Cube created the Big Three League, the cat came back, and so did his effortless scoring. Let's jog your memory. A Philadelphia native, Cuttino Mobley spent a few years at Cardinal Doherty High School, but those years weren't too noteworthy, first only being kept on the team due to his height, and later missing portions of his sophomore and junior years due to academic issues. But by his senior year, he was garnering D1 attention as one of the best players in Philadelphia, even earning a first-team All-City selection alongside other future NBA stars. But Mobley would not be going to college yet, as he would instead enroll at Maine Central Institute Prep School in mid-August of 1992, as Mobley was still a couple weeks shy of his 18th birthday at the time, and knew that there were some things that he needed to improve on, both academically and in regards to his game on the court, and he felt prep school was a better option than junior college. Then, after a season at MCI, Mobley announced his commitment to the University of Rhode Island, but his college career was again put on hold, as failing to reach the Prop 48 requirements would force him to redshirt as a freshman. But by the 95 season, Mobley was finally suiting up for the Rams. So Mobley joined a Rams team coming off an 11-16 season, who had also lost nearly half of their roster to graduation. But that did bode well for Mobley, as he would become the team's starting two-guard, and was joined by a freshman point guard named Tyson Wheeler, as the two lefties would quickly form a connection in the backcourt. And while Mobley was the team's top scorer, he shot the ball poorly and struggled with ball security, as Rhode Island would finish with a 7-20 record. Then Mobley's sophomore season was basically a wash, after a broken elbow ended his year after 2 games. But he was back and healthy in 97, starting the season in a reserve role before rejoining Wheeler in the backcourt after 10 games. And Mobley would show improved efficiency from his freshman year, to finish as the team's second best scorer. And overall, Rhode Island had become a high-powered offense, as the team won 20 games for the second straight season. And after making it all the way to the conference tournament championship game, the Rams would get an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament, taking on Purdue in round 1. However, Mobley would be held to just 7 points before fouling out. And after Rhode Island would give up a first-half lead, Purdue would take it in overtime. But Mobley still had one more year to make his mark, and he and the Rams would do exactly that in 98. So once again, Rhode Island was led by their lefty backcourt, but now they had their most complete team in years, featuring athletic junior forward Antonio Reynolds-Dean and a sophomore transfer in big man Luther Clay, as well as sixth man Preston Murphy bringing offense off the bench. And they would now be led by longtime UCLA coach Jim Herrick. So everything was in place for a memorable season, and that's exactly what it would be. Mobley had the most efficient year of his college career, leading the team in scoring while shooting nearly 42% from deep, and also leading the team in steals, as Rhode Island jumped out to a 12-2 start. Then later in the season, they would show they were the real deal by defeating ranked opponents on the road in George Washington and UMass, as they would ultimately end the regular season at 21-7. However, after defeating Dayton in the conference tourney quarterfinals, they would be bounced by Xavier in the semis. Yet once again, they had received an at-large bid to the Big Dance. Rhode Island came out with a dominant win over Murray State, as Mobley was one of 6 Rams to score in double figures. Then round 2 was the real test, a matchup with a Paul Pierce and Rafe LaFrentz-led Kansas team, ranked number 2 in the nation. But Mobley would be the best player on this day, going for a game-high 27 while adding 5 assists and 2 steals, as the Rams pulled off the upset to advance to the Sweet 16 versus Valparaiso. Another close game would see Mobley drop 16 points, and the Rams would win again, advancing to their first Elite Eight in program history. Unfortunately, the Magic ran out versus Stanford, as while Mobley had 20 points, Rhode Island came up just short, but Mobley ended his season with a first-team All-Conference selection and would receive the Atlantic 10 Player of the Year award. And while he wasn't the top prospect on anyone's draft board, all he needed was a chance. So as a second-round pick, with nothing guaranteed, Mobley would again have to earn his place, this time on the Houston Rockets. But he and fellow rookie Michael Dickerson did have the benefit of joining an aging team, where they could be big parts of the Rockets' future. Houston had their trio of Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, and the newly acquired Scottie Pippen, and Mobley would begin his career coming off the bench, yet would drop 13 points in his NBA debut. Then injuries at the point guard position would lead to Mobley entering the starting lineup, and with Pippen being a more than capable point forward, Mobley could still spend plenty of time playing off the ball, so he could get open looks and take advantage of his shooting touch. And while his numbers weren't crazy, he averaged double-figure scoring once he became a full-time starter, and played a big role in the team's success, and overall would be named second-team All-Rookie, as the aging Rockets were still one of the league's best teams in the lockout-shortened season, finishing with a 31-19 record and getting a matchup with the Lakers in round 1. Mobley had ended the regular season on a bit of a hot streak, and looked to keep that going in the playoffs, and in Game 1, he would record 13 points and 6 assists, and with the Rockets down by 1 in the final seconds, Mobley had a chance to win it.
They gotta hurry, 4 seconds. Mobley on the move to the basket, lost it, there's the horn.
And while his shot was blocked, it showed the level of confidence that Houston had in their rookie guard. But with that being said, Mobley would see his minutes take a big hit after this game, as Rockets coach Rudy Tomjanovich turned to more experience and defense off the bench. But Houston would still fall in 4 games, and Mobley's rookie year wrapped up with him averaging about 10 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. But this had also been the last great season Houston would get out of Hakeem Olajuwon. But luckily for them, the second overall pick of the '99 draft wasn't trying to play north of the border. So with Steve Francis having little interest in playing for Vancouver, the Rockets would acquire the high-flying rookie in a massive trade, and then shortly before the season started, they would trade Pippen to the Blazers. And with Dickerson having been included in the Francis trade, it looked like the Rockets had decided that Mobley would be half of their future backcourt. And with Olajuwon and Barkley missing a combined 100 games this season, the future might be coming quicker than expected. So Francis was a day 1 starter, but Mobley spent the season coming off the bench, backing up veteran Shandon Anderson. Yet when Mobley was on the court, his ability to create his own shot gave the Rockets instant offense on their second unit. And with Houston also playing a faster-paced game, it played to Mobley's strengths, as even in his bench role, he finished second on the team to Francis in scoring, and would also finish second in the league to Rodney Rogers in 6th Man of the Year voting. And with their up-and-coming backcourt, the Rockets didn't really miss a beat on offense, but defense was another story, as they dropped to the bottom half of the league on that side of the ball, and would finish with their first losing record since before Olajuwon got there, at 34-48, as Mobley wrapped up year 2 with averages of about 16 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Mobley began year 3 with a new contract, yet still was coming off the bench. However, he would drop 33 points in the season opener, and as he continued to impress, putting up nearly 18 points per game off the bench, he earned a spot alongside Francis in the starting lineup, and in just his 7th game as a starter, he would score a career-high 41 points in a win over Golden State. And with Mobley averaging over 20 points in his 49 games as a starter, he made it clear that he belonged in the starting lineup. And overall, this season would again see him finish second to Francis in scoring, while pulling down a career-high 5 rebounds per game. And with the Rockets having added forward Maurice Taylor in the offseason, and getting a slightly healthier year from Olajuwon, Houston as a whole showed great improvement, remaining among the league's top 10 in scoring, while also seeing their defense finish in the top 10, en route to a 45-37 record. But this would still leave them a couple games out of the West's final playoff spot, as Mobley's year ended with him averaging about 19.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. But for the first time in his career, Mobley was set to have an entire season as a starter, and it would be his best ever. So the Olajuwon era was officially over, after the Rockets would trade him over the offseason, and their new building blocks became their young backcourt duo. They would bring in some veteran scoring help in former All-Star Glenn Rice, but this didn't go as planned after Rice missed over 60 games. They would, however, get a great season from third-year forward Kenny Thomas. But with Taylor also missing the entire season, the Rockets' scoring suffered and would drop to near the bottom of the league. However, the majority of the scoring they did get came from their backcourt, as both Francis and Mobley averaged over 21 points a night. And as a day one starter, Mobley would lead the team in scoring, as he would drop at least 30 points on 13 separate occasions, and even crack 40 points twice, and would do so by putting up then career-high shooting splits as well. So all in all, he was scoring at his highest and most efficient rate, but injuries were still destroying any chance the Rockets had at the playoffs, as on top of Rice and Taylor, Francis went down in late November and didn't return until late December. And in that time, Houston went 2-13, with their first win of that stretch breaking a 15-game losing streak. And while they would improve once Francis came back, they were in too deep of a hole to recover. And with an offense which seemed to rely almost exclusively on Francis or Mobley isolation, they would finish at just 28-54 and miss the playoffs, as Mobley's career year had seen him average about 21.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. However, their poor record got them the first overall pick, and it looked like they were about to bring in Olajuwon's replacement. So it was Francis and Mobley again leading the backcourt, but now the man in the middle was the 7'6" Yao Ming. With Francis playing a healthy season, Mobley would see his scoring drop, but he was still the team's second leading scorer, as he and Francis continued as one of the league's most potent backcourts, with Mobley's effortless scoring and Francis's exciting plays giving the fans a show every night. And while Yao was coming along slowly, he was still trending in the right direction and was someone who could find the open cutter on offense, with the Rockets' backcourt tandem clearly thinking very highly of their new center, who would even act as the team's third best scorer, and a guy who could alter shots inside due to his size alone. And with the Rockets also trading to acquire James Posey, their biggest improvement would be on the defensive side of the ball, once again returning to being top 10 in points allowed. And after losing their season opener, they would never again drop below 500 this year. However, they also never got more than 5 games above 500. And when the season ended, they had turned in a 43-39 record. And while it was much improved from last year, it wouldn't be enough for the playoffs, as Mobley's year ended with him averaging about 17.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. But after a cancer diagnosis for Rudy T, unexpected change was coming in Houston. So Tomjanovich was forced to step down from his position to focus on his health, and to replace him, the rebranded Rockets would bring in the defensive-minded Jeff Van Gundy, and the Rockets would emphasize defense in 04, and would get results, finishing as a top 5 defensive team in the NBA. But Van Gundy also brought an offensive game plan that didn't really favor the play style of his 2 dynamic guards, and in turn the Rockets would also finish bottom 5 in scoring, with Francis and Mobley unsurprisingly seeing big drops in their scoring numbers, as Mobley fell to 3rd on the team. But it was more a result of the game plan than a decline in Mobley's play, and with the offense running through Yao a lot more in year 2, the perimeter became more open, and Mobley let it fly, leading the Rockets in attempted and made threes while putting up career highs in both categories. And with Yao's quick improvement and their core staying mostly healthy this season, Houston was able to total 45 wins on the year, and this time that would be enough for the 7 seed and a matchup with the LA Lakers. But with the Lakers featuring the perimeter defensive combo of Gary Payton and Kobe Bryant, nothing would be easy, and Mobley would especially struggle in this series, as he would also be dealing with a shoulder injury on his shooting arm, falling to the Rockets' 4th leading scorer and shooting below 39%. However, he would still rebound well and scored 21 points in Game 3 to help the Rockets get their first win of the series, but it would also be their last win, with LA closing it out in 5 games, as Mobley's year had seen him average about 16 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. And while many players on the team were likely expecting to build on this season and improve as the years went on, some of their top players weren't going to be there much longer. In late June, a blockbuster trade went through which saw the Rockets acquire the two-time reigning scoring champ from Orlando in Tracy McGrady. Yet to acquire him, they had to move on from their backcourt, sending both Francis and Mobley to the Magic. And while Francis was the headliner, Mobley had some big shoes to fill, as he was taking over McGrady's position. But in a way, Mobley and Francis's situation wasn't changing too much, as they were still set to be the starting backcourt and would be teaming with another young, high-potential center in the rookie Dwight Howard. And the 05 season would also be the healthiest for Grant Hill during his Magic tenure, so there was still optimism in Orlando. But Mobley wouldn't be part of it for long, as while he was doing his usual offensive work over his first 23 games, on some of the most efficient shooting of his career, the Magic's defense was non-existent. And with the added risk of losing Mobley to free agency after the season, Orlando would swap him for veteran Doug Christie. So now Cuttino Mobley was a king. Mobley joined a competitive Kings team who were 21-11 at the time of the trade. And while they would trade franchise star Chris Webber about a month after the Mobley trade, they still had a lot of offense. Mobley joined Mike Bibby in the backcourt, and the Kings also had Peja Stojakovic on the wing, with a versatile big man down low in Brad Miller. And the Kings were a team that pushed the pace and emphasized offense, which was a game plan that was well suited for Mobley's playstyle, as over his 43 games with Sacramento, he averaged nearly 2 more points than he had in Orlando, and continued with the most efficient season of his career, specifically from beyond the arc, as his 43.9% mark from deep would be a top 3 mark in the NBA. And with the Kings reaching the 50-win mark this season, Mobley was getting a return to the playoffs, as Sacramento was set to take on Seattle in round 1. Mobley would drop an efficient 22 points in Game 1, and would also drop 21 points in Game 3, which would help get the Kings their first win of the series. However, while his overall shooting was about what it had been during the regular season, his deep ball wasn't falling, only shooting 28% from beyond the arc, and going 2 of 8 from deep in a Game 4 loss. Then he was forced out of Game 5 early due to a sprained foot, and the Sonics wrapped it up, with Mobley's overall season seeing him average about 17 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. But Mobley was now a free agent, and while he would still be playing in California, it wouldn't be in a Kings uniform. Mobley joined a Clippers team who were already set at the forward position, with star big man Elton Brand and swingman Corey Maggette. But their biggest weakness last year was their backcourt, so the Clippers went out and addressed that, as they not only brought in Mobley, but they would also trade for point guard Sam Cassell. And just like that, they now had one of the most experienced and crafty backcourts in the NBA. And while the post proficiency of guards isn't something that is often celebrated, the Clippers had interestingly put together 2 of the most dangerous post players from the guard position in the NBA, as these 2 would utilize those skills this season, with Mobley really starting to rely more on his post game during his Clippers years, perhaps to help prolong his career, as he was now 30 years old. The Clippers had been led by Brand for half a decade, but they had also been underachieving throughout that time. And then when the Clippers lost Maggette for most of this season, most thought that it would be another disappointing year. But with Cassell and Mobley giving the Clippers 2 more guys who could get their own points and also find their teammates, the new-look Clippers would record their highest win total in over 30 years, finishing with a 47-35 record, which would get them a playoff matchup with the Denver Nuggets. Mobley started this series hot, averaging 19 points on nearly 54% shooting while draining 5 threes over the first 2 games. And LA had won both at home, but then Mobley struggled over the next 2, scoring 19 points combined. Yet while the Clippers dropped Game 3, they would take Game 4 in Denver. Then with a chance for Mobley to finally make it out of the first round, he dropped a postseason career-high 23 points in the closeout Game 5, as the Clippers won and were heading on to round 2 to take on Phoenix. A Phoenix team without star big man Amare Stoudemire gave the Clippers their best chance to pull off an upset, but Mobley came out with a 3-point Game 1. Then while he got back on track with 23 points and 8 boards to even the series in Game 2, this would be his peak, as while he would go on to hit double figures in 4 of his final 5 games, he would shoot below 38% from the field and about 22% from deep during this stretch. And while he did rebound well, the Clippers ultimately lost a hard-fought series in 7 games, as Mobley's first year in LA had ended with him averaging about 15 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. The 07 season was arguably Mobley's best on the Clippers, With McGrady playing a healthy year, and the Clippers also bringing in Tim Thomas, LA had more penetration and could more often collapse the defense. And while Mobley saw his scoring drop slightly, he was still LA's third leading scorer and had upped his overall shooting to 44%, and was the Clippers' most efficient three-point shooter, draining 41% of his shots from deep. But he was also one of their only three-point threats, as they were near the bottom of the league in long-range shooting, and they spent the whole season with point guard instability, as Cassell was limited to just 58 games, and the third-year Sean Livingston suffered a horrible knee injury, which took years to recover from. So the Clippers were at a disadvantage for most of the season without an effective point guard, as they would be one of the lowest scoring teams in the league, and wouldn't make it back to the playoffs after finishing at 40-42, as Mobley's year ended with him averaging about 14 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. So as had become the common theme with the 2000s Clippers, another season would be ruined by injury, and this was one of the worst, as a ruptured Achilles would lead to Brand missing all but 8 games in 2008, and the point guard situation was far from fixed, with Cassell eventually being waived by the Clippers. Then there was Mobley, who spent his entire season flip-flopping between coming off the bench and being a starter, with there really being no difference in his production either way. As among players who played at least 40 games for the team, Mobley was again the third leading scorer, yet had seen his scoring drop for the 4th straight year. And without a true point guard, or their best player, the Clippers weren't doing a lot of scoring in general, finishing as the league's second lowest scoring team, en route to a 23-59 record, as Mobley's year ended with him averaging about 13 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Mobley remained a Clipper to begin the 09 season and was back in a starting role over his first 11 games, as he was putting up his regular numbers. But then in early November, he was included in a trade to the New York Knicks. Yet little did he know, his last game as a Clipper would be his last game in the NBA. So during Mobley's mandatory post-trade physical, the Knicks medical staff discovered that Mobley had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the same condition that ended the lives of both Reggie Lewis and Hank Gathers, with Knicks team president Donnie Walsh even expressing uncertainty around whether Mobley would ever suit up for the team. But the Knicks had made the trade to acquire contracts which expired after the following season, due to the star-studded 2010 free agency class, headlined by LeBron James. So with the team wanting to open as much cap space as possible, they still proceeded with the trade. But about a month after the trade, Mobley was forced to announce his retirement, as his condition was reportedly worsening, with his 11 games in LA seeing him average about 13.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. But in the years following his retirement, Mobley had some doubts about his diagnosis. At the time of his retirement, Mobley seemed accepting and appreciative of the Knicks medical staff, and agreed that it was best to retire and not risk anything worse happening. But in 2011, Mobley filed a lawsuit against the Knicks, stating that he had felt pressured to retire due to feeling like he had no other options, as the specialist that New York sent him to would not clear him to play or suggest any alternatives, which forced him into retirement due to the condition, and led to insurance covering the remainder of his contract, which in turn would help the Knicks free up more cap space by facing less cap penalties. But the lawsuit also stated that this diagnosis had ruined any chance Mobley had to sign with another team, as he would go on to admit that he had been knowingly playing his whole career with at least some knowledge of his heart condition, yet signed a waiver every season to remove liability and be cleared to play, with Mobley also saying that he had went to other doctors for a second opinion post-retirement, and they had concluded that he in fact did not have HCM. And while Mobley attempted a comeback soon after this lawsuit, at 37 years old, it was too late. But while Mobley's NBA career was done, in the late 2000s, Ice Cube started the Big Three League, and Mobley showed that his heart was fine and his scoring touch hadn't gone anywhere. Cuttino Mobley would join Power during the league's inaugural season and take on a role of co-captain. Then the following season, he would help lead the team to the league finals and hit a shot that he'll never forget.
Here's Cuttino Mobley for the chip and the win! Yes! The Cat has done it!
So while it wasn't the NBA, Mobley had hit one of the most important game winners of his life and would continue as a member of Power for years, playing with the team until 2023 and continuing to get buckets well into his late 40s. And if there's ever a Big Three Hall of Fame, you can bet Cuttino Mobley will be in it. Cuttino Mobley had a smooth and relaxed game, but could start pouring in the points out of nowhere. Initially, it didn't even seem like he would make it to the NBA, after taking as long as he did to really break out at Rhode Island. But once he did, he got his opportunity, and that's all he needed, as he quickly became one of the best Houston Rockets of the 2000s, alongside Steve Francis and Yao Ming. Then while his stops in Orlando and Sacramento were brief, he always brought his scoring with him, and was a great veteran for the 06 Clippers, who finally broke into the playoffs. It's unfortunate his career had to end the way it did, as he likely still had some good basketball left in him. But at least Cuttino Mobley got to go out on his own terms to some degree with the Big Three. And no matter what type of court he was on, or uniform he was in, Cuttino Mobley understood that the game has always been, and will always be about, getting buckets. But that's it for today's episode on Cuttino Mobley. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Rockets teammates, or this one on a guy he played with on the Clippers. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.